Hello, Snijik Brand here with Purposeful Living Channel, and I'm excited to engage with you today in our week's inspiration. Now, today we are going to talk about enemies. Each one of us knows some enemies, and we usually term these enemies in form of a person or a circumstance. But did you know that there are certain other enemies that we may not even be aware of, and they seem to be the deadliest? Let's get back and dive into this. Alright, we talk about enemies. We hear of nations at war with each other, and you say that this country is an enemy of this country. Or even in our own lives, there are those we call friends, and then there are those we call enemies. And we have certain parameters to determine who is your enemy. But did you know that there is certain enemies that you're not even aware of? This is what usually happens. Something happens to you, and you wonder why it is happening to you. All right, let's give an example. You're always probably failing in school or in the course you're doing at university, and you're not excelling well. And then you begin saying, maybe I'm not just bright enough, but I was bright before. How come I'm failing? Maybe the teacher is bad. This lecturer is bad. He doesn't know how to teach. He just speaks out words. He doesn't make good definitions. I think I have the reason as to why I am failing. The lecturer is the enemy. Or they say, we don't have enough time. This school is fake. This university is fake. They don't give us the resources we need. I think they're the enemy. They are the cause of my failure. Then you say, I have this friend of mine. They never wake me up, or they never help me to study well. Probably they're the problem. So we easily point our fingers to people, or we point our fingers to circumstances, and therefore we define them. There, that is my enemy. At least I've figured out who the enemy is. But did you know there are those actual enemies that you do not know, and they are the ones creating the most damage? Now, in this video, we're going to talk about or define who or what an enemy is. And then we are going to find out the two kinds of enemies that we have. And then we are going to talk about the most deadly enemies you didn't know. Believe me, I realized that there are enemies that were lurking on the inside of me that I did not know about. Why are they the deadliest? Because they have a way of creeping in on us, and we are not even aware. And then they lurk on the inside of us and cause chaos, and we have no idea. So we keep on focusing on the outward without realizing that there is an enemy seated on the inside. And the more we point fingers to the outward person we think is the enemy, the one on the inside is creating more havoc. And by the time we realize it, it may seem too late, but never too late where God is in it. But you realize how much energy and time you've spent pointing in the wrong direction, pointing at the wrong person being the enemy, yet the actual enemy is on the inside. So let's rock in here. Who is an enemy? One that is antagonistic to another, especially one seeking to injure, overthrow, or compound an opponent. We talked about countries. When one nation is seeking to attack or compound another, so the other nation becomes the opponent, and this other nation becomes the attacker. So both, they are enemies to each other. Or you find that particular person who is always character assassinating you, who is always demeaning you, who is always saying awful things upon you or against you, because they do not want you to succeed in any way. So you consider him, that is my enemy. An enemy can be something or a circumstance that is harmful or deadly. And you can give an example in those situations. There are circumstances we look at that are considered as our enemies. There are some things we take in that we consider as harmful. So they are enemies to our health, enemies to our conscience, enemies to our whatever else it may be. Now, what types of enemies do we have? Before I even go deeper into this, I need to let you know we have a chief enemy. the one that is seated behind the wheel, orchestrating all kinds of evil against us. And that is Satan, the devil. That is our chief most enemy. All these other enemies we mentioned, this is the man behind the wheel. So watch out for him. But he's very cunning and he comes in different ways, and that's why we are talking about the enemies we didn't know, because we may know the devil, but in what form has the devil come to attack you? All right? And that's what this video is for. Now, number one, we commonly know the external enemies, like the ones speaking behind your backs, they backbite you, the ones attacking your personality, the ones that are character assassinating you, the ones that insult you, so on and so forth. These are the external enemies. The other kind are the internal enemies. But let's start with the external enemies. When we talk about the external enemies, these are the ones who are on the outside. They are not on the inside of you, but they are on the outside. These are the kind we see physically and can either be a person or a circumstance. They can be attackers or inhibitors and barriers. So the external enemies can come in two forms. The attackers. The attackers can be people who insult you verbally. There can be people who fight you physically. For example, someone comes to yours and says, you will always be a failure. You can't manage this, you're too weak. You have no brains. Why? The environment you come from is known for kings, is known for bright people. Give it up. So they're attacking you verbally, all right? Or they could even attack you physically. We look at the inhibitors or barriers. These are the people or circumstances that impede you from progressing. They slow you down, all right? And those are inhibitors. I could give an example. There is a circumstance that can stand in your way. Every time you're trying to succeed as a musician, you have this hindrance. You are discouraged. You feel like you cannot really pull through. You know, say, you have to pay this amount of money, you have to put in this amount of time, studio work, I don't have the money, it's a lot of money. You have to do a lot of promotions in order to hit the market and in order to increase your sales of your music. So those are inhibitors, circumstances that are in the way, hindering you from progressing. Now, there are many examples you can put to that, and if you have some examples of attackers, enemies that are attackers, and examples of enemies that are inhibitors or barriers that have come to mind, please write them down in the comment section below so that we can be able to see them. And now, we look at these inhibitors as they that cast doubt or fear. Think of someone, think of something that is casting fear or doubt in your mind. And its purpose or his purpose or her purpose is to slow down your progress by discouraging you and causing you to give up. So think about those. They are inhibitors. They are barriers. It's easy to know the external enemies sometimes, but the internal enemies are the tougher ones to figure out. These are the wrecking ball within, whose sole purpose is to tear you down slowly from the inside. Okay? Now the Bible says that we do not fight against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers of darkness. And this helps us to know the kind of weapons that we are to use on these internal enemies. These are the deadliest enemies, more deadlier than the external enemies, because the enemy you see is easier to beat. The enemy that you don't see is harder to beat. Also, their purpose is majorly to discourage, distract, and destroy you completely, eventually without you even realizing it. By the time the people on the outside see you turning into a maverick, they see you looking like a failure, there is already damage that has been made on the inside of you, and the enemy is still on the inside of you. All right? This is what happens. When the internal enemy attacks you, immediately in your mind you think, who is attacking me? You start looking on the outside for signs and signals. So it is easy for you to point to a person. It's easy for you to point to a situation or a circumstance. And that's where the internal enemy starts winning, because you have not recognized who they are. You haven't even recognized them. Okay? So what you're doing is you're putting your focus and effort on the physical. And here is the challenge or the problem. Sometimes we have blamed people for things that they haven't done because we have perceived them to be the enemy when they are not the actual enemy. Yet the enemy is the one on the inside of you. Something is going on the inside, as I'm going to tell you later on. But you point to the enemy, to the outer person as the enemy. You point to the circumstance as the enemy, as I gave that example in the beginning. You point to the school, you point to the lecturer, you point to your friend, you point to your siblings, you point to your parents, you point to the pastor, and yet the problem is on the inside. Now, who are these internal enemies and what do they attack? Now, I'm going to mention a few enemies here that I know, but I know you also know certain enemies that may come to mind. And when that enemy comes to mind, please write them down in the comment section, and let's talk a bit about this in the comment section. One is selfishness. Selfishness fights the ability to be selfless in being a blessing to others, caring for them, and loving them. God created us with the intention that we'll be selfless. He himself is a selfless God. He let his own begotten Son to become a sacrifice for our redemption. Whoever leaves their own child to die in the place of others, yet the people Jesus came to die for were mocking him, were not believing in him. That is selfless. Jesus himself gave of himself. That was selfless. All right? Now the enemy, the devil, the chief enemy, uses the enemy's selfishness and self-centeredness to attack us, so that we do not care about others, so that we do not love others, so that we are thinking about me, and see where that has got many of us today in the world. Because people are thinking of themselves, they're designing weapons of mass destruction. Because people are thinking about themselves, they have walked out on relationships. Because people are thinking about themselves, they have stepped on others so that they get that promotion they have long desired for. Because people are thinking about themselves, they have swindled and siphoned money into their own accounts so that they can enjoy while others are struggling with poverty. Selfishness. The second enemy is fear, and fear fights the faith within you to be courageous. God's desire is that we will be courageous. The Bible says, do not be afraid, but be courageous. But fear puts in us a thought of, I cannot do greater exploits, I cannot make any greater achievements, I am not good enough. You disqualify yourself because you are afraid that you can make great achievements. So fear fights the courage within you. Self-doubt. It fights the ability for you to believe in and embrace your ordained call and purpose, which leads to significance and fruitfulness. God has created you with greater potential inside of you. You can do mighty exploits. All right? You will do greater things than Jesus Christ did in his time. He said it in his word. But here, the devil brings in self-doubt. Self-doubt being your internal enemy. So that you cannot believe that you're able to amount to anything. You've heard statements like, I don't think I can amount to much. My dad was poor. My mom was poor. They didn't go far in school. So I guess it runs in the family. None of us in the family has ever been a successful musician, so I doubt if I can make it to the top of the charts as a musician. No engineer in our family, so what makes me think I can become an engineer? Self-doubt. That is an internal fear. So you realize when things don't work out in your life, you point fingers to something else. This teacher does not teach engineering well, yet there is a self-doubt on the inside of you, yet there is a fear on the inside of you, yet there is selfishness on the inside of you, all right? Now, self-doubt also fights your confidence in being accepted and part of God's family, and therefore worthy of his love, or worthy of his love. People who have self-doubt think they are not worthy of anything. They feel like, I am not worthy to receive the grace. I am not worthy to receive the love. I am not worthy to receive this. And so they settle for less. Their esteem becomes lower because they have self-doubt. Self-doubt is a very big enemy and is a deadly enemy. There is pride, which puffs you up to think you're greater and more important than you actually are. Do not think of yourself greater than the others, but think of others better than yourself. Pride makes you think that I am better at this, I can do this, I can do this. So there is that dangerous pride that leads you to a fall. Pride comes before a fall. Pride makes you think you don't need God. Pride makes you think you don't need other people's help. Pride makes you think you cannot take advice from another person. Pride makes you think that you don't need anything in life. I can just walk out of a relationship because this person is not good enough for me. Pride makes you point to others as the problem rather than you as the problem. Pride blinds you that you can't see your own weaknesses and your own challenges. So you project all that on the other person. So the people who are proud end up failing in relationships. They end up alienating themselves. They end up falling so deep and not seeking help at all. So those are deadly enemies that we have in our lives. So where do these enemies dwell? They majorly dwell in our minds or our hearts. So I want you to figure out which of the enemies I've mentioned dwell in the mind and which of the enemies dwell in the heart. I want to give an example. I've done something that is stupid, something that is foolish, and then someone rebukes me for having probably spoken rudely to them. I could think either they hate me, or they don't like me, or they love me and are helping me to not hurt them or anyone else. I have a choice to think one of the two. Either they hate me and dislike me because I'm better than them, or they love me and they want me to become better. Depending on what I have thought, it will lead to one of the two below. From that, I could either feel resentment for them. That is, if I think they hate me or dislike me, I am going to resent them. I'm going to have anger towards them. Or if I think they care about me enough that they have rebuked me and they love me, I am going to end up being appreciative of them and have warm feelings towards them. And what will that lead to? If I develop resentment and bitterness towards that person, it's going to trigger actions like stonewalling them, ghosting them, shout at them, or even insult them or throw insults at them. All right? But if I think of them as loving and it creates affectionate feelings towards them and appreciative feelings towards them, it's going to trigger actions like saying, I am sorry I did this. I didn't know that it was hurtful. Thank you for helping me see it in a much better light. I hope to do better. All right? Or if you could even hug them and say, thank you very much. And you begin showing them respect. It all began with a thought. Then it went into the heart, triggered some emotions, and those emotions were translated into actions. Do you get the picture? In the mind, into the heart, out into the action. As a man thinketh, so is he. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks, the hands act. So I hope you've understood who the deadliest enemies are, and those are the enemies we didn't know. Now I want to ask you a question. What are your biggest internal enemies that you struggle with? And how do you hope to combat them in order to overcome them? Take a moment and think through it. What are your biggest enemies? Is it fear? Is it self-doubt? Is it pride? Or the other enemies I haven't mentioned? How are you going to combat them so that you will come through victorious? You can write that in the comment section. Let's chat about this. All right? But I hope this challenges you to sit down and think. To not rush to pointing fingers to people or circumstances, but be inward looking and figure out, is there an enemy on the inside that I need to deal with? How did this enemy get on the inside of me? What was the cause and what are the triggers? Because there is always a cause and there is a trigger. So sometimes the person on the outside becomes the trigger of the enemy that is already on the inside, but instead we end up pointing fingers at the trigger rather than the actual cause on the inside of us. So take a moment and think through, who is the actual enemy, or what is the actual enemy on the inside of me? And how do you know that? The triggers all around you, because there are things or people that trigger those. You realize you have bitterness, you realize you have fear, you realize you have low self-esteem. They have triggered something on the inside of you that needs to be dealt with. So I hope this has helped you so much. In conclusion, sometimes the external circumstances trigger the enemy already on the inside, like I've already said. So you focus your attention on the outside issue or person, trying to avoid, hate them, fight them, yet the internal enemy is continuing with his work or her work unhindered on the inside. So figure out what that internal enemy is and figure out how you're going to combat them. If you feel this video can be of a great help to some people you know, please share the video link with them. And if you're watching this and you've not yet subscribed to this channel, I request you to subscribe to this channel so that you can be able to know of other videos that I would upload. Do not forget to hit the notification button. Until next time, God bless you.